Captain Jake Morrison walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime. The building was huge and made of strange crystal that glowed with soft blue light. He had been to this place many times before, but today felt different. Today he carried news that would change everything between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Jake wore his best uniform with all the medals he had earned during his 20 years of service. His face was hard and tired. He had seen too much death and too much pain in the last few months. The other species in the galaxy called humans young and foolish, but Jake knew better. Humans had been fighting wars and making peace long before. They met aliens. Now they were being treated like children by creatures who had never faced real danger. Ambassador Lisa Chang was already waiting in the main hall. She stood near the tall windows that looked out at the city below. Her black hair was pulled back tight and her eyes were cold. Lisa had spent 5 years trying to make the other species understand human ways. She had learned their languages and studied their customs. But today she was done trying to be polite. The emergency meeting had been called because of what happened on the 3 Alteron worlds. The Zephyrian Empire had attacked without warning. They used weapons that turned the air itself into poison. Millions of peaceful Alterans died in horrible pain. The few survivors sent videos of their dead cities to the council, begging for help. Jake remembered watching those videos in the briefing room. Back on Earth, Commander Ryan Bell had to leave the room when they showed the children. Even the tough soldiers cried when they saw what the Zephyrians had done. But when humans brought proof to the council, the aliens just talked and talked about laws and procedures. The council chamber was filled with representatives from 40 different species. Some looked like giant insects. Others were made of living rock. A few were just clouds of gas that spoke through machines. They all thought they were better than humans because their species had been in space longer. Jake thought they were cowards who hid behind rules when real action was needed. The Corvaxi delegate was the worst of all. His name was something humans could not say, so they called him Speaker 9. He looked like a mix between a lizard and a bird. His people had been in the council for thousands of years, and he never let anyone forget it. Every time humans suggested doing something to help others, Speaker 9 would talk about how young and stupid humans were. Lisa walked to the center of the chamber. All the alien eyes turned to look at her. Some of the delegates were already making dismissive sounds. They thought this was just another human complaint that they could ignore. Lisa opened her datapad and began to read the evidence against the Zephyrians. She showed pictures of the destroyed cities. She played recordings of the dying Alterans calling for help. She read the reports from human doctors who had tried to save the victims. The poison the Zephyrians used was designed to cause maximum pain before death. It was a weapon meant to terrorize, not just kill. When Lisa finished reading the evidence, she looked around the chamber. Most of the aliens looked bored. A few seemed upset, but not enough to actually do anything. Speaker 9 was cleaning his claws like he had better things to think about. The ethereal delegate spoke first. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. She said the council needed to study the matter more carefully. There were procedures to follow, forms to fill out, committees to form. Maybe in a few months they could send a strongly worded message to the Zephyrians. Jake felt his hands turn into fists. A few months meant more dead worlds, more children dying in pain, while aliens worried about paperwork. He looked at Ryan, who was standing near the back of the chamber. Ryan's face was red with anger, but he stayed quiet. Good soldiers knew when to wait for orders. The Christine representative made sounds like breaking glass. His translator said they should consider all sides of the conflict. Maybe the Alterans had done something to anger the Zephyrians. Violence was never the answer. Peace talks were always better than action. Lisa's voice cut through the chamber. like a knife. She said humans had brought evidence of war crimes 7 times in 2 years. 7 times they had been told to wait. 7 times they watched innocent people die while the council talked. She said Earth was tired of watching genocide while aliens debated proper procedures. Speaker 9 finally looked up from his claws. He said humans were too emotional and too quick to jump to violence. Young species always wanted to fight instead of think. The council had kept peace in the galaxy for thousands of years by being careful and wise. Humans needed to learn patience like the older species had. That was when Jake saw Lisa's face change. All the diplomatic training fell away. All the careful politeness disappeared. She looked like a human mother protecting her children from monsters. She told Speaker 9 that human patience had limits. She said watching children die while aliens talked about procedures was not wisdom. It was cowardice. The chamber erupted in angry sounds. Delegates clicked and buzzed and roared their disapproval. How dare this young species insult their wisdom? How dare humans question the way things had always been done? Speaker 9's feathers puffed up, and he made sounds like an angry cat. Lisa raised her hand for silence. When the chamber finally quieted, she spoke in a voice that everyone could hear clearly. She said humans had tried to work within the council system. They had followed the rules and respected the procedures. But rules that protected murderers were not worth following. Procedures that let genocide continue were not worth respecting. She pulled out an official document with the seal of Earth government. She said humanity was formally withdrawing from all council operations. Human ships would leave council space. Human personnel would abandon their posts. Human aid and trade would end immediately. Earth was done trying to work with species who cared more about paperwork than people. The aliens looked shocked. This had never happened before. No species had ever walked away from the council. They thought Lisa was bluffing. Surely humans would not abandon the benefits of galactic civilization over a few dead aliens on distant worlds. Jake smiled as he watched their faces. They had no idea what humans were capable of when they stopped being polite. Ryan was already sending coded messages to human fleets across the galaxy. Within hours, every human ship and station would receive their orders. Operation Exodus would begin immediately. Lisa folded the document and put it away. She told the council they could debate, conform committees, and fill out forms all they wanted. Humans would not be there to watch. She turned and walked toward the exit. Jake and Ryan followed her. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent chamber dot. As they reached the doors, Speaker 9 found his voice. He called after them saying humans would regret this decision. The galaxy was dangerous for species who tried to go alone. The council offered protection and trade that humans could not survive without. Lisa stopped and turned back. She said humans had survived ice ages and world wars and plagues long before they met aliens. They would survive whatever came next. The only question was whether the galaxy would survive without humans to clean up the messes that older species were too proud to fix themselves. Then she walked out and left the council to face the chaos that was coming. Diane Rodriguez sat in her office on Communication Hub 7 watching the galaxy fall apart. 3 days had passed since humans walked out of the council chambers, and the first problems were already starting. Emma had spent 8 years building the network that let different species talk to each other across vast distances. Now she was about to turn it all off. The communication system was more complex than most aliens realized. Each species used different frequencies and signals. The Korvoxi spoke in high-pitched sounds that hurt human ears. The Kristin people made vibrations through solid matter. The gas clouds used electromagnetic pulses. Emma and her team had created special translators and relay stations that made it all work together. But the aliens had made one big mistake. They thought the technology belonged to them just because they were older. They never bothered to learn how it actually worked. They just used it and assumed it would always be there. Now Emma was packing her equipment and preparing to leave. Her assistant, Jake Peters, came running into the office with a worried look on his face. He said the ethereal assembly was trying to contact the Outer Rim colonies, but their messages were not getting through. The relay station at Jump Point 12 had gone offline when the human crew left. Without that, station signals had to take the long way around 3 star systems. What used to take minutes now took hours. Emma was not surprised. She had designed the network to be efficient, not redundant. Every human station served multiple purposes and connected to dozens of others. Take away just a few key points, and the whole thing would slow down. Take away all the human stations, and communication across the galaxy would become almost impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Alex Thompson was having similar problems with the hyperspace beacon network. He stood on the bridge of Engineering Ship Constellation, watching his people pack up equipment from Beacon Station 45. This station guided ships safely through the dangerous Maelstrom Nebula. Without it, vessels would have to go around the nebula, adding weeks to their journey. Alex had warned the Council about this 2 years ago. The beacon network needed more backup systems and better maintenance. But the aliens said it was working fine, so why spend money to fix it? They never understood that human engineers were constantly making small repairs and adjustments to keep everything running smoothly. His communication officer brought him urgent news. 2 cargo convoys had disappeared in hyperspace storms near the Spiral Arm. Both convoys were carrying emergency medical supplies to colonies hit by a plague outbreak. The ships had tried to navigate dangerous jump routes without human guidance systems. Now 300 crew members were missing, and thousands of sick aliens would not get the medicine they needed. Alex felt bad for the missing crews, but he had his orders. Operation Exodus meant all humans were leaving whether they wanted to or not. The safety protocols his people had put in place would have prevented those ships from entering the storm zone. But alien captains thought they knew better than human computers. Captain Maria Santos was busy with her own withdrawal on the trade station Crossroads. This massive station sat at the center of 5 major shipping routes. Maria's Merchant Marine handled almost half of all cargo that passed through the sector. Her ships were fast and reliable, and her crews knew how to deal with difficult customers. The station manager was an old Korvoxi named Trade Master Vex. He kept following Maria around, begging her to reconsider. He said human traders were essential to keeping goods moving between distant worlds. Without them, prices would go up and delivery times would get much longer. Some colonies might not get vital supplies at all. Maria explained that humans were not choosing to leave the trade business. They were being forced out by a council that did not value their contributions. If Vex wanted to blame someone, he should talk to Speaker 9 and the other delegates who thought humans were too young and stupid to matter. But the real problem was deeper than just moving cargo. Human traders had become the glue that held the galactic economy together. They spoke multiple languages and understood different cultural practices. They knew which species could be trusted and which ones required careful watching. They had built relationships with suppliers and customers across dozens of worlds. Maria's first officer, Jack Wilson, brought her the departure reports. 17 human trading companies were pulling out of Korvoxi space. 23 more were leaving the ethereal sectors. The Kristen Consortium was losing 31 human shipping contracts. All told, nearly 40% of intersector cargo transport was about to disappear. The aliens were starting to panic, but it was too late to stop what was happening. Maria watched through the station windows as human ships prepared to leave. Some carried families who had lived in alien space for decades. Others hauled valuable equipment and supplies back to human worlds. All of them were following orders to abandon everything they had built. Admiral Frank Turner reviewed the situation reports from his command ship in Earth orbit. His tactical analysis teams had been predicting this chaos for months. They had tried to warn the Council, but no one wanted to listen to warnings from the supposedly young and stupid human military. The reports painted a clear picture. Communication networks were failing. Navigation systems were breaking down. Trade routes were being abandoned. Emergency response times were getting longer. The careful balance that kept galactic civilization running smoothly was falling apart. Frank had served in the human military for 30 years. He had seen what happened when vital systems failed during wartime. Armies that lost communication could not coordinate attacks. Fleets that lost navigation got lost in space. Supply lines that broke down left soldiers without food or ammunition. The same principles applied to civilian society on a much larger scale. His intelligence officer, Commander Susan Clark, brought him updates from across the galaxy, the Alteron. Survivors were still begging for protection from Zephyrian attacks. Without human peacekeeping forces, the genocide was continuing unchecked. The Outer Rim colonies were reporting increased pirate activity now that human patrol ships were gone. Several mining operations had been attacked and their crews killed or captured, but the most serious problem was the cascade effect. Each system that failed put more stress on the remaining systems. When communication networks slowed down, emergency responses became less effective. When trade routes closed, colonies ran short of essential supplies. When security patrols disappeared, criminals became bolder. Everything was connected, and humans had been the ones keeping it all connected. Dr. Kevin Jones monitored the situation from his research station on Luna. His job was to track galactic news and analyze political trends. The data coming in was worse than even the most pessimistic human predictions. Armed conflicts were increasing rapidly. Economic indicators were falling. Social stability was declining across multiple sectors. Kevin had studied galactic history and knew this pattern. When central authority weakened, local conflicts always got worse. When trade systems failed, colonies turned inward and stopped cooperating. When communication broke down, rumors and fear spread faster than facts. The galaxy was entering a period of chaos that could last for decades. His assistant, Dr. Nancy Ford, showed him intelligence reports from their remaining contacts in alien space. The Nexari Syndicate was already moving to reclaim territory they had lost to human law enforcement. Pirate groups were forming alliances to attack shipping lanes. Several species were mobilizing military forces to protect their borders from neighbors they no longer trusted. The aliens were learning a harsh lesson about taking things for granted. For years they had criticized human methods and complained about human involvement in their affairs. They said humans were too aggressive and too quick to interfere. They wanted the benefits of human efficiency without having to acknowledge human contributions. Now they were finding out what their civilization looked like without human involvement. The answer was not pretty. Without human mediators, old enemies were preparing for war. Without human traders, essential goods were not reaching the people who needed them. Without human engineers, critical systems were breaking down. Captain Ben Lewis commanded the colony ship New Horizon as it left Corvoxy space. His passengers were human families who had lived peacefully among aliens for generations. Many of them were crying as they watched their homes disappear behind them. They had not wanted to leave, but staying was not an option when humans were no longer welcome. Ben tried to comfort them by explaining that this was temporary. Surely the aliens would realize their mistake and ask humans to come back. But privately, he wondered if the damage could ever be repaired. Trust once broken was hard to rebuild. Pride once wounded often turned into lasting hatred. The galaxy was about to learn what chaos looked like when the people who prevented it decided to stop caring. Commander Steve Parker watched the attack unfold from his monitoring station on Earth. The screens showed smoking ruins where the Kalari mining colony used to be. 300 alien workers lay dead in the asteroid facility that had been there, home for 20 years. The attackers had left their signature burned into the metal walls. The Vanguard Collective had returned. Steve remembered fighting these same terrorists 5 years ago. Back then, he commanded a rapid response fleet that could reach any threatened system within hours. His ships were fast, and his crews were trained for exactly this kind of emergency. They had spent 3 years hunting down Vanguard cells and destroying their hidden bases. The galaxy had been peaceful since then, but now Steve's fleet was gone. His ships were back in human space, and his crews were reassigned to other duties. The Outer Rim colonies that had once felt safe under human protection were defenseless. The Vanguard Collective knew this, and they were taking full advantage of the situation. His communication officer, Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, brought him more bad news. The terrorists had hit 4 more targets in the last week. A research station studying rare crystals. A farming colony that grew food for 3 different species. A medical facility treating plague victims. A school where alien children learned about galactic history. All destroyed. All left burning as a message to anyone who might resist. Steve felt sick watching the reports. These were not military targets. They were civilians who had never hurt anyone. The Vanguard claimed they were fighting for freedom from alien oppression, but they only attacked soft targets that could not fight back. They were bullies and murderers who hid behind political slogans. The worst part was knowing he could stop them. Give him back his fleet in 2 weeks, and he would hunt down every Vanguard cell in the galaxy. His people knew their tactics and their hiding places. They had done it before, and they could do it again. But the Council had made it clear that human military forces were not wanted in their space. General Patricia Hayes studied the tactical reports from her office in Colorado. The situation was getting worse, faster than anyone had predicted. Without human peacekeeping forces, old conflicts were starting up again across multiple sectors. Species that had been held in check by the threat of human intervention were now free to settle ancient grudges. The Korvaxi were moving military forces toward the disputed Helix Nebula. That region had been claimed by both the Korvaxi and the Ethereal Assembly for over a century. Human mediators had negotiated a ceasefire that kept both sides from fighting. Now, with humans gone, the old hatred was boiling over again. Patricia had personally negotiated that ceasefire during her time. As a diplomatic liaison, she knew both species well enough to understand their positions. The Korvaxi needed the rare minerals found in the nebula to power their technology. The Ethereals considered the region sacred to their ancient religion. Both sides had valid points, but neither was willing to compromise without pressure from neutral parties. Human forces had maintained observation posts throughout the disputed zone. Their presence reminded both sides that breaking the ceasefire would bring swift consequences. But those posts were empty now, and reconnaissance showed military buildup on both sides of the border. Ships were being armed. Troops were being deployed. War was coming whether anyone wanted it or not. Her aide, Major Dan Cooper, brought her intelligence updates from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire was expanding again. They had taken 3 more Alteron worlds without any resistance. The survivors were being herded into camps where they faced slow death from starvation and disease. The few escape attempts were met with mass executions designed to terrorize the others into submission. Patricia had fought the Zephyrians before. They were cowards who only attacked species weaker than themselves. But they were also clever enough to avoid direct confrontation with human forces. They knew humans would not tolerate genocide and would intervene to protect innocent civilians. Now, with humans gone, they were free to continue their program of systematic murder. Agent Nancy Ford worked from a hidden facility beneath the Nevada desert. Her job was tracking criminal organizations that operated across species boundaries. For the last 3 years, she had been dismantling the Nexari Syndicate piece by piece. These criminals specialized in slavery and trafficking. They stole people from weak colonies and sold them to buyers who did not ask questions. Nancy's network of informants had penetrated every level of the organization. She knew their leaders and their methods. She had evidence of their crimes and the locations of their bases. Working with local law enforcement, she had arrested hundreds of syndicate members and freed thousands of their victims. The organization had been reduced to scattered CELLS, hiding in remote systems. But now the syndicate was coming back stronger than ever. Without human law enforcement coordinating the fight against them, they were rebuilding rapidly. Nancy's sources reported new slave markets opening on worlds that had been clean for years. Kidnapping rates were rising across the Outer Rim. Children were disappearing from schools, and adults were vanishing from their workplaces. The aliens were trying to fight the syndicate on their own, but they did not understand how the criminals operated. Each species only saw the crimes committed in their own territory. They did not realize they were facing a coordinated network that moved victims and resources between different sectors. Human investigators had been the only ones with jurisdiction to track criminals across species boundaries. Dr. Kevin Jones compiled reports from his monitoring stations, scattered throughout human space. The numbers were getting worse every day. Armed conflicts had increased by 50% since humans left the Council. Economic trade was down 30% and still falling. Emergency response times had doubled in most sectors. Crime rates were spiking across the board, but the most disturbing trend was the breakdown of interspecies cooperation. For decades, humans had served as translators and mediators between different alien cultures. They understood the customs and taboos that could cause misunderstandings. They knew how to present ideas in ways that different species could accept. Without human diplomats to smooth over cultural differences, old prejudices were surfacing again. The Christian Consortium had cut trade relations with the gas cloud species after a perceived insult during negotiations. The insect-like hive minds were refusing to communicate with mammalian species at all. The rock people had withdrawn into their mountain worlds and would not respond to any outside contact. Each group was becoming more isolated and suspicious of others. Kevin had predicted this would happen, but seeing it in the data was still shocking. Galactic civilization was not just losing human services. It was losing the connections that held different species together. Humans had been the common factor that everyone could relate to. Without them, the galaxy was fragmenting into hostile camps. Colonel Amy Carter reviewed intelligence reports from her command center on Mars. Her network of sources an alien. Space was still providing information, but the picture they painted was grim. 3 separate wars were brewing, and none of the traditional peacekeeping mechanisms were working. The species involved trusted human mediators, but would not accept intervention from other aliens. The first war was between the Korvaxi and Ethereals over the Helix Nebula. Both sides were mobilizing massive fleets, and the fighting could start any day. The second conflict involved the hive minds and several smaller species who were trying to break free from hive control. The third war was a civil conflict within the Christian Consortium between traditional elements and reformers who wanted closer ties with other species. Any one of these wars could destabilize entire sectors. All 3 happening at once would create chaos on a scale not seen for centuries. Refugee populations would overwhelm relief systems. Trade networks would collapse completely. Criminal organizations would thrive in the confusion. The galaxy might not recover for generations. Amy's analysts estimated that human intervention could prevent or quickly end all 3 conflicts. But the same council that had driven humans away was too proud to ask for help. They would rather watch their civilization burn and admit they needed the young species they had dismissed as inferior. Captain Ben Lewis received another desperate message while his colony ship traveled toward human space. This one came from the Alteron survivors, still trapped in Zephyrian camps. They begged humans to remember their friendship and come back to help. They sent pictures of children dying from hunger and old people too weak to stand. They promised to give humans anything they wanted if they would just stop the killing. Ben showed the message to his senior officers during their daily briefing. Some of them wanted to turn around and fight the Zephyrians regardless of orders. They had friends among the Alterans, and it hurt to abandon them. But disobeying direct orders would only make things worse for everyone. The hardest part was knowing that a single human battle group could end the Alteron genocide in a matter of days. The Zephyrians were bullies who ran when faced with real resistance. But stopping their current offensive would require human forces to operate in Council space without authorization. That would give the aliens an excuse to declare humans the real aggressors. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was nothing like the formal meetings that had taken place before humans left. Speaker Thawanis of the Ethereal Assembly tried to maintain order, but her gentle voice was lost in the chaos. Delegates were shouting at each other in a dozen different languages. Some were making threatening gestures with claws and tentacles. Others had simply given up and were preparing to leave. Speaker 9 of the Korvaxi stood on his platform screeching insults at the ethereal delegation. He blamed them for starting the conflict over the Helix Nebula. His feathers were puffed up in a display of aggression that made several smaller delegates back away in fear. The translator systems could barely keep up with his rapid-fire accusations and demands for satisfaction. The ethereal delegate responded with harmonious tones that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. She said the Korvashi were the ones who had broken the ancient treaties by moving military forces into disputed space. Her people had only responded to protect their sacred sites from desecration. The blame lay entirely with the aggressive lizard birds, who could not control their territorial instincts. In the back of the chamber, the hive mind representative clicked and buzzed its displeasure. The insect-like creature was angry about recent attacks on hive colonies by rebels who wanted independence. Without human peacekeepers to maintain order, the rebellions were spreading. Several worlds had declared themselves free from hive control and were forming their own governments. The Christine delegate made sounds like breaking glass as it tried to get attention. Its people were facing their own civil war between traditionalists and reformers. The crystal beings had never experienced internal conflict before. They did not know how to handle disputes between their own kind. They needed mediators who understood both sides of the argument, but there were no mediators left. The humans who had once smoothed over these kinds of disagreements were gone. The aliens were discovering that they could not talk to each other without human translators to explain what each side really meant. Cultural misunderstandings that humans had prevented were now causing major diplomatic incidents. Trade Master Vex hobbled into the chamber on his old legs. The ancient Korvaxi had managed the largest commercial hub in his sector for over 2 centuries. He had seen trade wars and economic crashes before, but nothing like the current disaster. His normally proud voice shook as he described the collapse of interspecies commerce. He showed charts and graphs that painted a grim picture. Cargo shipments were down 60% across all major routes. Prices for essential goods had doubled or tripled on many worlds. Some colonies were running out of food and medicine because their usual suppliers could no longer reach them. The economic system that had kept billions of beings fed and healthy was falling apart. The worst hit were the frontier worlds that depended entirely on trade for survival. These remote colonies could not grow their own food or manufacture their own equipment. They relied on regular shipments from industrial worlds to stay alive. With human merchants gone and alien, traders overwhelmed, the supply chains were breaking down completely. Vex begged the council to find some way to restore the trade networks. His people were rationing food for the first time in generations. Medical supplies were so scarce that treatable diseases were becoming fatal. Children were dying because vaccines could not reach them in time. The economic crisis was becoming a humanitarian disaster, but the council had no solutions to offer. None of the alien species had the ships or crews to replace human merchants. They had relied on human efficiency for so long that they had forgotten how to handle logistics on a galactic scale. The systems that humans had built were too complex for others to operate without extensive training and experience. Dr. Emma Rodriguez received the first official communication from the council 3 weeks after she had shut down the last human communication relay. The message came through old emergency channels that were slow and unreliable. It was addressed to all human technical personnel and marked as urgent priority. The aliens were begging for help with their failing communication networks. Messages that once traveled instantly across the galaxy now took days or weeks to reach their destinations. Emergency calls for help were getting lost in the system. Military commanders could not coordinate with their forces. Doctors could not consult with specialists on other worlds. The breakdown of communication was making every other problem worse. Emma laughed bitterly as she read the plea for assistance. The same aliens who had dismissed human technology as crude and primitive are now admitting they could not make it work without human expertise. They offered to pay huge sums for human technical support, but they still would not acknowledge that humans deserved equal treatment in the council. She forwarded the message to her superiors on Earth, but she already knew the answer. Humans would not return to fix alien problems while being treated as second-class citizens. If the council wanted human help, they would have to change their attitudes about human rights and representation. Technical support was the least of what needed to be negotiated. Admiral Nicole Grant studied the intelligence reports from her flagship in Earth orbit. The human withdrawal had been more successful than anyone had dared hope. Every prediction about galactic chaos was coming true ahead of schedule. The aliens were learning exactly how much they had depended on human competence and reliability. But success came with a price. Nicole received dozens of personal messages every day from alien friends and colleagues begging for help. These were individuals who had worked alongside humans for years. They understood that their governments had made terrible mistakes. They wanted to find some way to restore the old partnerships without losing face for their species. The most heartbreaking messages came from alien civilians caught in the middle of conflicts they had not started, families trapped by war, children suffering from preventable diseases, elderly beings abandoned when medical systems failed. These people had never voted to exclude humans from the council, but they were paying the price for their leaders' pride and prejudice. Nicole knew that human military forces could end most of the current conflicts within weeks. A single battle fleet could stop the Zephyrian genocide and scatter the terrorist groups attacking civilian targets. Human peacekeepers could negotiate ceasefires and establish safe zones for refugees. Human engineers could restore the critical systems that kept galactic civilization running. But intervention without invitation would make things worse in the long run. The aliens needed to learn that cooperation required mutual respect. They had to understand that humans were equals, not servants. The current crisis was painful, but it might be the only way to establish a better relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Captain Maria Santos received an offer she could hardly believe. The Kristen Consortium was willing to give humans exclusive trading rights throughout their territory in exchange for resuming cargo operations. They would also provide access to their most advanced manufacturing technology and share intelligence. About criminal activities in their space, the offer was incredibly generous. The Christian territories contained some of the richest worlds in the galaxy. Exclusive trading rights would make human merchants wealthy beyond imagination. Access to crystal technology could advance human science by centuries. The intelligence. Sharing would help track down the criminals who were preying on innocent victims. But Maria knew the offer came from desperation, not friendship. The Christian economy was collapsing without human logistics support. Their people were facing shortages of everything from food to medical equipment. They were willing to pay any price to restore the trade networks that kept their civilization functioning. She reported the offer to her superiors, but recommended caution. Accepting would help the Christian people, who were suffering through no fault of their own. But it would also undermine the unified human withdrawal that was forcing the entire council to confront their mistakes. Individual deals with desperate species might ease immediate problems while making long-term solutions impossible. Ambassador Chun Wei found herself in an impossible position. As humanity's former deputy representative, she knew most of the alien diplomats personally. Many of them were reaching out through unofficial channels, asking for guidance and assistance. They admitted their governments had been wrong to treat humans as inferior partners. Some offered to support human membership with full voting rights if the crisis could be resolved quickly. Others suggested forming a new organization that would give humans equal status from the beginning. A few even proposed that humans should lead the reformed council, since they had proven their importance so dramatically. But Chun also received threats from hardline factions who blamed humans for the current chaos. These extremists claimed that humans had deliberately sabotaged galactic systems to force their return. They threatened to declare war on human space if the withdrawal continued. Some called for boycotts of any species that negotiated separately with humans. The alien leadership was fracturing under the pressure of multiple crises. Moderate voices who wanted to compromise with humans were being shouted down by fanatics who preferred destruction to admitting error. Admiral Nicole Grant stood on the bridge of her flagship Defiance, watching the largest alien fleet in galactic history approach Earth. 6 months of chaos had finally broken the pride of the Galactic Council. Ships from 40 different species had come together to beg for humanity's return. But the humans were no longer the same desperate petitioners who had walked out of the council chambers. The alien fleet stopped at the edge of human space and requested permission to enter. Nicole could have made them wait for days or weeks to demonstrate human power. Instead, she granted immediate passage because humans had already proven their point. The galaxy knew who was really in charge now. There was no need to humiliate defeated enemies who had finally learned wisdom. President Jonathan Hayes waited in the orbital conference station the humans had built specifically for these negotiations. The station was impressive, but not threatening. It showed human technological advancement without seeming like a military display. Every detail had been carefully planned to send the right message about humanity's new position in galactic affairs. The alien delegates who entered the conference chamber looked very different from the proud beings who had dismissed human concerns 6 months earlier. Speaker 9 of the Corvaxi kept his feathers flat and his eyes downcast. The ethereal representative's usually musical voice sounded strained and tired. Even the arrogant gas cloud beings moved with less confidence than before. Speaker Thalanus still served as the nominal leader of the council, but everyone knew she had no real authority. The decisions would be made by the species leaders who had come to Earth personally. These were beings who had ruled star systems for centuries. Now they sat quietly and waited for humans to tell them what would happen next. President Hayes did not make them wait long. He presented humanity's terms in clear, simple language that left no room for misunderstanding. Humans would return to galactic civilization, but only as full equals with complete autonomy over human space. The discriminatory laws that had restricted human expansion would be eliminated immediately. Human military forces would have authority to act independently when facing humanitarian crises. More importantly, humans would have veto power over council decisions that affected interspecies conflicts. Never again would human peacekeepers be forced to watch genocide while aliens debated procedures. Never again would human merchants be excluded from profitable trade routes because other species considered them too young to compete fairly. Aliens had no choice but to agree. Their economies were collapsing. Their communication networks were failing. Wars were spreading across multiple sectors, while criminal organizations preyed on the weak and defenseless. They needed human expertise to prevent the complete breakdown of galactic civilization. But Hayes made it clear that simple agreement was not enough. The aliens would have to prove their commitment to change through actions, not just words. Human observers would monitor compliance with the new treaties. Any attempt to return to the old discriminatory practices would result in immediate human withdrawal with no possibility of future negotiations. Dr. Rebecca Torres smiled as she read her new orders. As the head of the reformed Galactic Medical Initiative, she would have unprecedented authority to provide aid wherever it was needed. No longer would dying patients wait while alien bureaucrats debated whether humans were qualified to practice medicine across species boundaries. Her first priority was ending the plague outbreaks that had spread unchecked during the human withdrawal. Several worlds were facing epidemic diseases that could have been contained easily with proper medical support. Human doctors and researchers had developed treatments for most interspecies illnesses, but they had been prevented from sharing their knowledge widely. Rebecca's new position came with authority to override local medical regulations when facing emergency situations. She could deploy human medical teams anywhere in the galaxy without waiting for permission from species governments. She could share human medical technology with any civilization that needed it. Most importantly, she could establish permanent medical stations in troubled regions to prevent future outbreaks. The aliens had learned that medicine was too important to be limited by political boundaries. Human doctors had saved millions of alien lives over the years. Preventing them from helping had only resulted in unnecessary death and suffering. Now they would have the freedom to practice medicine according to their oath to help all living. Beings. Captain Sam Mitchell prepared his new rapid response fleet for immediate deployment. Unlike the old peacekeeping forces that had to request permission before acting, his ships had authority to intervene in humanitarian crises without waiting for alien approval. The galaxy would never again watch helpless civilians die while bureaucrats debated proper procedures. His first mission was ending the Zephyrian genocide against the remaining Alteron populations. Sam's fleet had been specifically designed for this kind of operation. Fast ships with overwhelming firepower that could reach any threatened system within hours. Advanced medical facilities to treat victims of atrocities. Specialized equipment for evacuating refugees from combat zones. The Zephyrians had grown bold during the human absence. They assumed their victims had no protectors, and their crimes would go unpunished. Sam intended to teach them otherwise. His battle plan was simple and devastating. Destroy their military forces. Capture their leaders. Free their prisoners. Leave their economy in ruins as a warning to other potential aggressors. The Alteron survivors would finally get the justice they deserved. But more importantly, the galaxy would learn that humans now had both the authority and ability to stop genocide wherever it occurred. Any species that chose to prey on the weak would face swift and overwhelming retaliation from human forces. Commander Lisa Rodriguez reviewed the latest crime statistics from her new intelligence center. The Nexari Syndicate and other criminal organizations had grown strong during the human withdrawal, but their time was running out. Human law enforcement now had galaxy-wide jurisdiction, and unlimited resources to hunt down anyone who harmed innocent civilians. Lisa's new position combined traditional police work with military intelligence gathering. Her agents could operate across species boundaries without bureaucratic interference. They had access to communication intercepts and financial records that revealed criminal networks spanning multiple star systems. Most importantly, they could coordinate with human military forces to take down major criminal operations. The syndicate leaders thought they were safe in their hidden bases on remote worlds. They had grown comfortable during the months when human investigators were confined to human space. Now they would discover that nowhere in the galaxy was beyond the reach of human justice. Their victims would be freed and their organizations destroyed completely. The reformed council met for the first time in the human orbital station rather than the old chambers on Nexus Prime. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. Humans were now the dominant species in galactic civilization, and everyone else would have to adjust to that reality. Speaker Thalanis called the session to order, but her role was largely ceremonial. The real power belonged to President Hayes and the other human representatives who sat at the center of the chamber. When they spoke, everyone else listened carefully. When they made suggestions, everyone else agreed quickly. The first order of business was establishing the new humanitarian protocols that would prevent future atrocities. Human military forces would have permanent bases in every sector, with authority to intervene immediately when civilians were threatened. Human medical teams would have unrestricted access to provide aid wherever it was needed. Human investigators would track down criminals across species boundaries without bureaucratic interference. The aliens voted unanimously to approve every human proposal. They had no choice if they wanted human cooperation in rebuilding their damaged civilization. The old council that had treated humans as junior partners was dead. In its place was a new organization where humans held the ultimate authority to decide what was acceptable behavior for galactic citizens. Captain Ben Lewis received new orders as his colony ship approached human space. Instead of continuing to Earth, his passengers would be returning to their homes in alien territory. The worlds they had abandoned were now safe under human protection. The species that had once looked down on humans now competed to offer them the best treatment possible. Ben's passengers were excited to return, but also wary of trusting alien promises again. They had been forced to abandon everything once before when humans became unwelcome. What guarantee did they have that the same thing would not happen again when alien attitudes changed? The answer was simple power. Humans now controlled the systems that kept galactic civilization functioning. Aliens who wanted human services would have to treat humans with respect. Those who did not would face economic isolation and military intervention. The balance of power had shifted permanently in humanity's favor. Trademaster Vex welcomed the first human merchant ships back to his station with elaborate ceremonies of gratitude. The old Korvaxi had seen his commercial empire crumble during the human absence. Now he was willing to offer humans anything they wanted in exchange for resuming normal trade operations.